The entire agri-food sector bears the brunt of the climate crisis.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse.
Proteste der Landwirte zeigen, wie wichtig der stratégische Dialog ist.
La PAC, c'est plus du tiers du budget total de l'Union européenne.
We have to find a new consensus on the future of agriculture.
Since January 1st of this year, Poland has been holding the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. Since joining the EU in May 2004, the Polish economy has doubled in size, and its gross domestic product ranks sixth, just behind the Netherlands and ahead of Sweden and Belgium. Agriculture, forestry and fishing account for 2.9% of Polish GDP. That's twice the European average. In 2023, Poland was the fifth biggest contributor to Europe's agricultural sector, just behind France, Germany, Italy and Spain. But what are the challenges facing the industry? What are its strengths? And what does Polish agriculture look like today? In this 53rd episode of Food for Europe, we take you on a journey of discovery through Polish agriculture. My first guest is a program officer in the European Commission's Directorate-General for Agriculture and Rural Development. One of his tasks is to monitor the implementation of Poland's strategic plan for the Common Agricultural Policy. Arkadiusz Mazur, hello, and welcome to Food for Europe.
Dzień dobry. Bonjour.
Two things about you. First, you're Polish. And second, while you were a student, you worked as a seasonal worker on a farm in Germany, and now you're in the Commission. So lots of experience. To begin with, could you give us a quick snapshot of where Polish agriculture is today?
Yes, the agri-food sector in Poland is of great economic, social, and environmental importance. Poland's total agricultural land area is estimated to be 59.9% of the country's total area. In 2023, the total area sown was 11 million hectares. So it's huge scale of production. The use of the EU budget under the Common Agricultural Policy has accelerated the process of agricultural modernization and restructuring. But increasing farm profitability, income, productivity, and generational renewal remain challenges.
What is the average farm size in Poland?
According to data for 2023, over a half were the smallest farms, up to 5 hectares. This is around 600,000 farms. We can observe a gradual increase in percentage of largest farms with area of 50 hectares and more, which in 2023 amounted 3.6%. Average area of agricultural land per farm has been gradually increasing for several years. In 2024, it reached above 11 hectares. Unfortunately, this area may be insufficient to maintain itself solely from agricultural production. There are significant differences between individual voivodeships. The smallest farms are located in the south of the country, the largest, with an average of 33 hectares, are located in the west of the country.
And in terms of jobs, what percentage of the working population is employed in the agricultural sector?
9% of all employment is in agriculture.
That is a huge number. By comparison, the number is 2% in France.
But in 2005, it was 16.9%. So employment in agriculture was declining.
And what about the average age of farmers in Poland?
21% of farmers are under 40. The age structure among farm managers is better than in other European countries. Nevertheless, the aging of the farming population in Poland is becoming apparent.
Thank you very much, Arkadiusz, for all of that insight. Stay tuned, and we'll see you at the end of this episode after a long stopover in Poland. Did you know that Poland is the European Union's leading producer of raspberries and blackcurrants and vies with Spain for the top spot in blueberry production. It's also one of Europe's biggest producers of cereals, milk, and poultry. In this episode, we're also taking a closer look at another sector that has developed particularly strongly since Poland joined the EU, cattle farming. Adrian Sarlat, a French-speaking journalist in Warsaw, met with Jacek Zarzecki, a farmer who runs a 60-hectare farm in the northeast of the country. His herd includes 50 Limousin cattle. That's 3 times the size of the average Polish cattle farm. For the moment, we're going to take a break from the countryside and pick things up in Warsaw.
We aren't meeting on my farm for the simple reason that in Poland there is a threat of foot and mouth disease, the first for several decades in the European Union. That's why we don't allow anyone not connected with the farm to enter the farm.
Jacek Zarzecki is also vice president of the Polish Sustainable Beef Platform and an expert with the European Commission.
The Polish Platform for Sustainable Beef is an organization that brings together representatives from across the beef industry. The Polish beef sector has powerful development opportunities. Poland is one of the biggest beef producers in Europe and one of the biggest exporters. We export mainly to Germany, France, Italy, and Spain.
The common market is essential here. The average consumption of beef in the European Union is 10 kilos per person per year. That's 2.5 times Poland's consumption.
Produkujemy ponad 500,000 ton wołowiny, z czego ponad 300, blisko 300. We produce over 500,000 tons of beef, of which almost 390 tons is exported, and we only import 30,000 tons of beef. Polish consumers buy mainly Polish products, but also European products, because European products meet the highest standards in terms of quality and food safety. One of the greatest advantages of joining the European Union is access to the common market. Poland exports a total of 54 billion worth of products, 10 billion of which are animal products. The Polish livestock sector has changed thanks to EU funding. Before, we were just exporters of live animals. Today, thanks to EU funding, we export finished products. Of course, there are problems, because today the most important thing is to ensure a fair income for farmers and, above all, to ensure the renewal of generations.
It's the same situation everywhere in the EU. In all member states, farmers' work is undervalued and the young are leaving.
Over the years, we've seen a decline in the number of farms, mainly animal farms. Almost 40% of Poles live in the countryside, but most of them are no longer farmers. People from the city who move to the countryside often don't understand the specificities of farming. Some people see us as dinosaurs on the way to extinction. For example, in my village, 10 years ago there were 15 farmers. Today there are 4.
And while Jacek acknowledges that the common agricultural policy is a guarantee of quality in the sector, some of the red tape he believes is just creating unnecessary extra work for farmers.
The main drawback of the common agricultural policy is its bureaucracy. Today, farmers often spend more time filling in paperwork than working with their animals.
się nimi. Kolejne
Other
kwestie,
problems facing livestock farmers are the attacks on the sector in terms of animal welfare. Nobody in the world has animal welfare standards like the European Union, yet there is a desire to raise these standards even higher, which will have a negative impact on production.
Zwierząt jak Unia Europejska. I mimo to dąży się do tego, żeby...
One example is the reduction in the number of animals allowed on lorries, the reduction in transport times, or the presence of vets when animals are loaded and unloaded.
Skrócenie czasu
There is a
transportu,
shortage of vets throughout the European Union. It's impossible for them to be there every time animals are loaded or unloaded.
Którzy zajmują się dużymi zwierzętami i nie ma realnej możliwości, żeby byli oni przy każdym załadunku i rozładunku.
Magdalena Nowicka is Deputy Director of the Direct Payments Department at the Polish Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Magdalena, you're very welcome to Food for Europe. Magdalena, Polish farmers, who we've just heard from, and European farmers have long been asking for a simplification of the rules and regulations around CAP. What solutions have you been able to put in place to limit the time farmers spend on paperwork?
In discussions on the common agricultural policy, the issue of simplification has been around for as long as I can remember. Firstly, there is the demand for simplification. Secondly, for this policy to be effective. And thirdly, for it to be verifiable. And we are moving in this triangle between these three challenges, and we are looking for a certain optimization.
Could you give me a few examples?
Yes, in Poland, from the outset, we have implemented a whole series of activities dedicated to preserving valuable natural habitats and rare bird species associated with agricultural areas. In the initial period of implementing this action, we surrounded ourselves with experts, ornithologists or phytosociologists. Today, we are able to determine very precisely whether the location of the plot corresponds to the presence of a given species or habitat on the land. And on this basis, we can decide whether or not the land is eligible for the type of action in question. It's certainly easier for the farmer because all he has to do is declare his interest in implementing this instrument.
Arkadiusz Mazur, who we spoke with earlier, highlighted the fact that more than half of Poland's farms are less than 5 hectares in size, which does not allow those farmers to make a living solely from their agricultural production. What are they entitled to in terms of CAP support, and what are the terms for that support?
From the point of view of their real contribution to agricultural production, these smaller farms may not be very important. However, from the point of view of landscaping, public services, preserving biodiversity, etc., they play their part. Under the Common Agricultural Policy, it is possible to apply what is known as the Small Farm Payment, a simplified method of making direct payments to the smallest farms. This involves higher payments per hectare, but without the possibility of using additional instruments, such as ecological programs, for example. This greatly simplifies their participation in the Common Agricultural Policy.
Magdalena Nowicka, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
To better understand the structural diversity of Polish agriculture, we turned to Professor Marek Wigier from the Warsaw-based Institute of Agricultural and Food Economics. Professor Wigier, thank you for joining us.
Dzień dobry.
Hello. Can you tell us about the standard of living of Polish farmers, and how dependent is that on the size of their farms?
Dochody w polskim rolnictwie są bardzo zróżnicowane.
Income in Polish agriculture is very diverse. If we look at the structure of Polish farms, we have 300,000 farms that make their living from agricultural production.
To są gospodarstwa, w których działalność rolnicza
And the remaining
jest albo
900,000 farms
dodatkową,
are where farming is an additional
albo
activity.
są one tylko gospodarstwami ze statystycznego punktu widzenia.
On these small farms, income from farming is below acceptable levels.
Dochody są poniżej poziomu,
But this is mainly due to the structure and economic capacity of these small operators.
ale wynika to przede wszystkim
On the other hand, large commodity farms are farms that provide a satisfactory income for the farmer,
są gospodarstwa, które
for
przynoszą
the maintenance of his
dochód
family and for development.
satysfakcjonujący dla rolnika, dla utrzymania jego rodziny i dla rozwoju.
We should bear in mind that around 20% of farms in our country produce around 60% of commodities.
20% gospodarstw rolnych
This means that 80% of farms only produce around 40% of
czyli
commodities.
te 80% gospodarstw wytwarza zaledwie około 40% produkcji towarowej.
Polish farmers regularly demonstrate their discontent, as was the case last January in Warsaw against the backdrop of Poland's accession to the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU. So what have Polish farmers been unhappy about?
To jest trudne pytanie. Rolnicy
It's a difficult
w
question.
Polsce zawsze, również przed okresem
Farmers in
transformacji
Poland have
systemowej,
always
jeszcze
owned land,
za
even in the
czasów
days of
realnego
real
socjalizmu,
socialism.
byli właścicielami ziemi. Polska była jednym z
When
nielicznych
Poland was the only
krajów, jedynym
country where
krajem, w którym
75% of agricultural
75%
land was privately owned.
gruntów rolnych było własnością prywatną. Rolnicy
Farmers
od
have always
zawsze,
taken care of their farms and their
dbali
land.
o swoje gospodarstwa rolne i o swoją ziemię. Bardzo
They were
byli
very
przywiązani do
attached to
własności.
property. And this culture of protest
ta
was
kultura
always present in
protestu
them.
w nich była od zawsze. Natomiast oczywiście
On the other hand,
jeśli
of course,
narzuca się
if additional administrative
stronie
burdens are imposed,
administracyjnej dodatkowe
farmers protest
obciążenia,
against this,
to rolnicy przeciwko temu protestują.
forgetting
Nie
that this
zauważając
declaration is linked to
równocześnie,
obtaining
że
additional income on the farm.
raportowanie związane jest z uzyskiwaniem dodatkowych
Because the
dochodów
benefits they
gospodarstw
bring to the
rolnych.
environment are paid for by the Common Agricultural
świadczenia,
Policy
które
budget.
Realizują na rzecz środowiska, są opłacane ze wspólnej polityki rolnej, z budżetu wspólnej polityki rolnej.
Which agricultural sectors have benefited most from EU membership?
Praktycznie wszystkie sektory
Virtually all
rolnictwa
agricultural
są
sectors have
beneficjentami,
benefited.
ale trzeba
But we mustn't
pamiętać,
forget
że
that,
tak naprawdę
in
motorem
fact,
napędowym naszego sukcesu
the
gospodarczego
agri-food processing industry is the driving force behind our economic and export success.
To jest
It is the driving
motor
force behind all the
wszystkich
changes
zmian,
that are also taking
które
place on farms.
następują również w gospodarstwach rolnych.
It might be useful to add that the value of Polish exports is 53 billion euros a year.
52-53 miliardy euro.
Before joining the European Union, Poland was, it's hard to believe, a net importer of foodstuffs.
Importerem netto żywności.
Today, we have a foreign trade surplus of 18 to 19 billion euros,
Nadwyżki w handlu zagranicznym.
and this surplus is mainly attributable to the processing
Powstaje
industry.
głównie dzięki przemysłowi przetwórczemu.
Poland has shown tremendous solidarity with Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian invasion. But the decision of the EU to help Ukraine by easing customs duties on grain was deeply unpopular with Polish farmers. Poland eventually placed a ban on grain from Ukraine. Can you give us your perspective on that?
Wybuch wojny na Ukrainie spowodował po pierwsze napływ ogromnej rzeszy.
The outbreak of war in Ukraine initially led to an influx of large numbers of migrants into Poland.
Granic możliwy był wjazd
But at the
na
same time,
teren
with
Unii
the opening of the
Europejskiej
borders,
produktów
it allowed
rolnych
agricultural
z
products from
Ukrainy.
Ukraine
Wiele surowców
to enter the
rolnych, które
European
wjeżdżało do
Union.
Polski, nie
Unfortunately,
jechało
many of the
w głąb
agricultural
kraju,
raw materials
do
that entered
portów
Poland
bałtyckich
were not
nie było
exported outside the
eksportowane
European
poza Unię
Union.
Europejską, tylko bardzo często towary te były sprzedawane.
Very often these goods were sold in Poland. This has destabilized the agricultural market in Poland. Hence the farmers' protests, which are all the more justified given that prices have suddenly started to fall very, very sharply.
Bardzo spadać. Natomiast w perspektywie lat sądzę, że
However, I believe that Europe should try to use the production potential of Ukrainian agriculture to build a competitive advantage in international trade.
Rolnictwa ukraińskiego dla zbudowania przewagi
We
konkurencyjnej
need
w
to
handlu na
ensure that
rynkach
the raw
międzynarodowych.
materials produced in Ukraine meet the same requirements, the same standards.
Spełniały te same wymogi weterynaryjne, te same standardy sanitarne.
Of course, this will be a huge challenge for cereal producers. We need to bear in mind that by 2050, there will be around 10 billion human
Powinniśmy
beings.
pamiętać o tym, że na świecie będzie wzrastała liczba ludności. W perspektywie
So we need to think in the long term about how we can meet this demand, produce the raw material, process it, and sell it with added value to the countries that will need this food.
surowiec, przetworzyć go i z wartością dodaną sprzedać do tych krajów, które tej żywności będą potrzebowały.
Professor Marek Wigier, thank you very much.
Dziękuję uprzejmie, cała przyjemność po mojej stronie.
Thanks a lot, my pleasure.
We started the episode with Arkadiusz Mazur from DG Agri, and we'll finish with him. So, Arkadiusz, we asked Jacek Zarzecki, the farmer who spoke earlier, if he had a message for you. Here's what he told us.
To, czego dzisiaj europejscy
What European farmers today expect from the European Commission is, in addition to cutting red tape, a more fluid or stronger defense of the European livestock sector against the negative effects of the agreement with the Mercosur countries on beef imports.
Mercosur chodzi o import wołowiny.
What can you say to Jacek about that?
I have to say that agreement includes a bilateral safeguard mechanism. It allows the EU to impose temporary measures to regulate unexpected and significant increase in imports, causing serious injury to the domestic market. These safeguards also apply to agricultural goods covered by tariff quotas. We are confident that the entering into force of the agreement will not lead to any distortion in our market. I have to add that the new quota, which will be open for beef, corresponds to about 1.6% of EU beef consumption.
Finally, Arkadiusz, as we said at the top of the programme, Poland holds the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. What are its priorities for European agriculture?
The main messages of the Polish presidency for agriculture include food security, simplification of the CAP, and stabilization of farmers' income.
Thank you very much. That was Arkadiusz Mazur from DG Agri of the European Commission.
Również dziękuję. Cała przyjemność po mojej stronie.
And that concludes the 53rd episode of Food for Europe, dedicated to Polish agriculture. Thank you to all our guests for their contributions to this podcast. Long working hours, financial insecurity, geographical and social isolation. Our next episode will focus on the mental health of farmers and the support tools available. In the meantime, feel free to listen again to previous episodes, available on all podcast platforms. See you soon, and as always, take good care of yourself.
The entire agri-food sector bears the brunt of the climate crisis.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse.
Proteste der Landwirte zeigen, wie wichtig der strategische Dialog ist.
La PAC, c'est plus du tiers du budget total de l'Union européenne.
We have to find a new consensus on the future of agriculture.